Paul, welcome to B2B Content Strategist. It's great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
No, well, thank you. The pleasure is all mine. It'd be great to kick this conversation off by, if you wouldn't mind, sharing a little bit about your career to date. So how you got to where you are today at Tipalti. And I know you've had a very interesting career covering journalism and PR and B2B marketing. So what has that journey look like for you?
Yeah, well, it's been a long one for starters. So I like to tell people that I've had two different sides to my career. And the first side, the thing that I studied, the thing that I started studying journalism when I was in the 8th grade. I distinctly remember a project I got involved in that was about journalism. And so journalism is the direction that I went. So I studied it in college. I got out of college and I had this brief moment where I thought, oh, journalists don't make any money, and I remember standing there next to a professor of mine that I really respected. And we were looking at starting salaries for different jobs and journalists was right at the bottom. So I decided to go into PR at that time. And once I realized that PR wasn't really the same thing as journalism, and journalism is something that I just really loved. I wanted to write about more meaningful things, and I was writing about toaster ovens. And so I decided, no, I'm going to get back to journalism. So I did that. And the whole first half of my career, first I was writing about retail business, and it was great stuff. It was about trying to get scoops on what company is going to buy what company, what executive is leaving. And, so it was really like full-fledged business stuff, even though it was done on a small scale for a very small audience. But it was a great education in reporting, interviewing. I really had to learn how to interview CEOs and things like that. And then after I did that for a while, I kind of stumbled into technology and I became a technology journalist. And I started writing about these really old technologies that none of your audience will remember, like mainframe computers and client server frameworks and all this sort of stuff, all of which I knew nothing about. But I learned from great people, sort of moved up and started leading magazines in financial services technology in particular. So it was banking and Wall Street and insurance technology. And that was back when magazines were printed things on paper that you carried around with them. I did that. And then within that company, I was with that company for almost 15 years. And within that company, I kind of transitioned from journalism into developing digital marketing businesses. The company was very keen on, they recognized that magazines and news wasn't necessarily going to build the profits that they wanted, and they needed to expand. And they built a big global trade show business, which, these things still make a good amount of money, but they were trying to build digital marketing businesses within them as an alternative to going to an agency. Why not come with us? And so I got very involved in that, and that got me involved in video and demand generation and webinars and all sorts of things on a very big global scale. And so once I sort of got restless and bored with that, and that's when I started to veer off into more marketing stuff. When I left that company eventually, I really came back to my content roots. And I think kind of found at that time that something we expected to happen, which was that brands were going to become publishers on their own, really started to come true. And that's where really I think roles for people like me came about, to take journalistic discipline, but do it in the context of trying to support a company's sales effort, was kind of a new thing. And they needed real journalists and wanted real journalists to do it. And so I've done that for Oracle, for RingCentral, for Maven Clinic in the healthcare space, and now with Tipalti, which is in financial services automation.
And so could you explain a little bit more just about just what Tipalti does? What does your role look like? So what does your team look like and that kind of thing?
Well, this is a really good question because my team is in the midst of change. Tipalti does financial services automation. And so what does that mean? Lots of companies have financial systems, accounting systems. They use ERP systems to handle large swaths of financial management, budgeting, forecasting, the whole nine yards. Tipalti sits within that as kind of an extension of those systems in many cases, although it's a standalone system as well. But what we do is we automate these often really time-consuming, really difficult, error-prone processes, particularly around invoicing and accounts payable automation, but also around what's called mass payments. Mass payments is really non-invoiced payments. So think of a company like Uber. Uber drivers don't send invoices every month to get paid. Uber has to monitor what those drivers are doing, how much revenue they're taking in, has to figure out what their contract is, and then has to automatically pay them based on the data that it has. And so there's no invoice taking place, and they have, hundreds of thousands of drivers who need to be paid at any given moment. Mass payments is the mechanism by which you do that. And that's actually how Tipalti started 12, 13 years ago, as a mechanism to do those mass payments. But as I said, now we do accounts payable. In addition to mass payments, we have a procurement solution. We have company expenses. So it's really a full-fledged automation solution. And automation is the key to what we do. So if you have an enterprise resource planning system, adding Tipalti to that and integrating really easily with that means that you can add really much more advanced automation to those processes, and take something like closing your books, which for some companies can take weeks, can now take days as a result.
Really, really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I know it doesn't sound like it would be in the beginning, but it really is interesting software that actually makes a huge difference every day.
Yeah. And so many companies and brands that, we as kind of lay people just interact with on a daily basis are dependent on that process, aren't they, in that back-end technology. So it's really interesting to hear more about that. With your role in particular then, how do you structure the team? Like what does that look like? What kind of role specifically are you responsible for?
I mentioned earlier, we're in the midst of some change. It's not a big team. So the team consisted of, including myself, just 4 people. But we do use contract work as well on that to fill in some gaps. But I shifted the way that the team is focused. We had some roles that, and some great people, but what happened was the roles weren't really fitting. So the interesting thing is that I'm a content marketer, and I've always been involved in content marketing. And by that, I mean particularly long form content. So very much involved with all those ebooks and white papers and things like that, and downloadable assets and measurements of trying to get leads and all this kind of stuff. At Tipalti, my role is much more content broad. And so, for example, my team handles all advertising copywriting, email copywriting, website copywriting. And so it's a mix of both long form and short form skill sets. And we did have a role that was for more copy editing and proofreading. And unfortunately, we needed to add more resources to deal with this incredible growth of particularly short form copywriting, but additional skills that we wanted to add in terms of the long form copywriting that we do. And so I'm currently looking for a senior copywriter and a content marketing strategist who's a bit more junior to fill out my team right now. For us and for anybody who's listening who's interested in looking for work, we're kind of specific. The copywriting role, we look for roles in Toronto and Vancouver. The copywriting role can be based here in Northern California, but the other roles we're primarily looking in Canada, which is a big market for us, and we have big offices in Canada as well. But definitely on the lookout for some talent on those ends. But we cover, my team. We really look at some point, we look at every single word that externally gets out of the organization. Internal things and stuff like that we don't really look at, but we're doing it all and making sure that it all fits the right messaging and is using our style guides properly and all that kind of stuff. So it's a high volume of oftentimes relatively quick but important work.
And is there any particular skill sets that you always like to ensure that you retain in-house, and then others that you sometimes or always look to go to external experts like freelancers, agencies, that kind of thing for more flexible solutions?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. While I have worked with agencies on strategic initiatives, I do try to keep as much strategic work in house with us. I think that's the thing that we bring to the table. It's not that an outside agency can't help us, but I kind of feel like we were hired to bring strategic guidance to what we do based on our experiences. And so that's the one thing that if I can, I'm trying to always keep that part of it in house. When it comes to outsourcing, I think like most people, I outsource primarily execution of writing projects. We have people that we work with. I've got someone that I work with and have worked with for a long time in different companies who is really adept at putting together customer stories. And so with a high volume of customer stories that we've had coming in, particularly in the last few months, we've had to offload some of that, teach, this person the particular formula that we have for doing it, but then let him run off and do those things. And I think that's a situation where we put in a lot of effort in finding the person who really understands the style that we want, which is not easy. We went through multiple people where we just felt like they weren't getting the tone right. They weren't including the right pieces of information. And so it might seem like a simple thing to outsource, but I'm sure it's not. Finding somebody who really kind of gets who you are. I know that sounds kind of fluffy, but you do need them to understand who you are. And we do have someone now who we can communicate with in a very shorthand kind of way, who's like, yep, got it, and then delivers it. And so that's one of the big areas that we've done it. I mean, traditionally, I have outsourced things that I just felt like weren't core competencies. At Tipalti, we don't outsource SEO, but I have outsourced a lot of SEO work in the past because that while I have an SEO background, I've never been an SEO specialist. So I kind of know my limits on that. And looking around the team and knowing that we didn't really have people who felt comfortable kind of stepping up and taking more of an SEO leadership role, I've outsourced things like that, which I consider very strategic, but I feel like you have to be honest. What are our core competencies? And in some instances, that wasn't. We do definitely outsource sometimes on some messaging work. So getting back to like the advertising side of my life, we do bring in, we at Tipalti, we always try and start with ourselves putting together concepts and boards and ideas of what we want to do with, say, an ad campaign. But there are certainly times, sometimes often it works really great. And then sometimes there are times where we feel like, for whatever reason, we're just in a rut. And then we do have, sort of partners that we've worked with in the past where we feel like maybe somebody else can help jumpstart us a little bit and give us an idea that we can work with. But what's interesting, and I know we'll talk about this in a little bit, is we have found that AI can serve that purpose as well, and I'm sure a lot of people you've spoken to have that same experience, that it can be a kind of a springboard for us in a way. Rarely does anything that we're like, wow, that's great, let's use that. But it does serve that purpose that we sometimes turn to agencies and partners for, which was, can you help ignite a spark in us because we feel like we're just stuck and we're too close to it. And AI can help there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is, like you were saying, that's the sign of a, good agency to help with that new, fresh perspective and things like that. But let's dig into AI. So let's just have that conversation, because you would just obviously say can help spark those ideas and things like that. So are there any other ways that you guys are leveraging AI with your marketing efforts at the moment?
I feel like, Tipalti is kind of all over it. AI is all over what we do, not just in, I can talk specifically to what my team does in terms of AI, but throughout the company, I imagine like a lot. It's almost every month when someone mentions another tool and they're like, oh, well, we can use such and such. And I'll be like, I'm not familiar with that tool. And they'll say, oh no, it's an AI tool that we use in sales, for example, the sales teams are obviously applying a ton of AI that kind of affects our team, meaning we are very involved. This is an area where I hadn't traditionally gotten involved. I am very involved at Tipalti in helping craft outreach emails. And so sales outreach emails traditionally have been left up to, or at other companies I worked at, they were traditionally left up to the salesperson. You know, they get some guidance, but ultimately they're going to write them. And the teams come up with a bunch of them and they decide, hey, these ones worked really well for me. And they try and, you know, that whole process. Well, we've been really involved in trying to, once we built our core messaging at Tipalti, which started just before I joined, but we have core pillars of messaging that we want everything to focus on when we write about it. So make sure that you're bringing in these core pillars wherever they're relevant. My job was to take that and apply that to, at one point, what was like, I think, 1,500 email templates. And the sales team was in the process of trying to get those 1,500 outreach email templates down to about 300 or 400, which still seems like a lot, right? But they were trying to get it right. You're like, that's crazy. But they're trying to get it down to about 300 or 400. And then they wanted it to reflect what we're supposed to be talking about. And so they use various tools. Like, so one of the things we did was bring Grammarly to them. So we had implemented Grammarly right after I joined, and really worked closely with that company to fine tune Grammarly for us. And so we've got a lot thrown in there about our voice and tone. And we've got a lot of terminology and knowledge share and knowledge based stuff thrown in there from our specific information. We put a lot of, carefully placed a lot of snippets in there that hopefully highlight key terms for people and then immediately provide them a snippet of how exactly to say it. And they can drop that right in, right? We provided that and we trained the entire sales team on Grammarly so that they could use the AI component in Grammarly to help take, they're not writers, obviously. So what we were trying to say was, just use that, like, if you just use this straight out of the box, it's going to be better than oftentimes what you feel you've written. And then, you know, they're adding AI tools that are helping them identify contacts at the right time that should be contacted. And the AI is determining what the sequence should look like. So like there's AI all through that process, which is fascinating to me because it's kind of opening new doors for us in content. We use primarily Grammarly and any form of Gen AI, whether I'm using, GPT or whether I'm using Claude. It may be different depending on the task, but I mean, me and my team, we use it every single day, multiple times a day for all the reasons that we talked about, which is how do we pull an idea out that we can work with, and you get this, I'm sure all your audience has seen this. You get this like lengthy page worth of great information, but there's really only a line or two that hopefully sparks you to say, oh, I can do that. Because most of the rest of it is not really understanding who we are. I mean, it's impressive and I love it, but it doesn't really understand to the level that we need it to understand, like someone who works here would understand. But it does give you that, in the best scenario, that one line or that whatever it might, that one phrase where you're like, oh, I could do something with that. And then you're off to the race.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you have to just see it as a tool and an enabler, don't you? And if you ask it to come up with 10 ideas, you might go with one of them or one sentence that it shares. Is there anything that you have any, particular rules around? Definitely do not use AI for this. So where you've had negative experience or mishaps, or you just know that there's almost a rule within the team or the company, we don't use AI for these things in particular.
Well, I don't know that we've explicitly said don't use it. We're a small enough company to where we don't necessarily have to set out that rule. But I mean, what's interesting for me is that I almost don't need, I feel like because I see every piece of content that is going to go out into the world, I read it. And I don't know about you, but you can identify AI in a matter of seconds, right? I mean, it's always going to give you three examples of something. It'll say, this thing includes X, Y, and Z. There's always three. It'll always use enable and ensure and transform and streamline. It'll always write in the very same way. And what I've told my teams and the teams around my teams, like the product marketing team, which does a lot of writing, what I've told them is just use it, but please don't copy and paste. And so, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but like I said, for me, the benefit is I can always find it, and so when I get around to reading it, I just keep kind of letting them know that like it's okay to use AI, but it's not okay to copy and paste AI. You really do need to augment this stuff. And so I'm trying to think like off the top of my head, is there anything where I say like, I'm not going to let you use AI? I will not. The thing that I've been finding, especially recently, is that whether it's OpenAI or whether it's Perplexity, the ability of the tool to sometimes just generate numbers out of thin air, and I worry with some people outside the content marketing team that they don't necessarily recognize those things. But I don't want to keep them from using AI, but I just have to make sure that I'm trying to make sure that we validate everything that comes through. So, so far, no, because our guidance with AI has always been use it, but don't copy it.
I have to say, I think I sound quite similar to you in terms of I can really spot where it has been used. I think I have two annoying traits, which is that I'm one of those really annoying people that spots plot holes in TV series and films and just gets really annoyed by them. And then I also I can't not see a word or a sentence that are just like, that's AI. I really need to I mean, it's good because of the work that I do, but it's kind of annoying too because I can't not see it, if you know what I mean. It's just right there and annoying. But I agree with everything that you said. I think it's more, don't use it to do the creation, but use it to enable what you create, and don't be copying and pasting and things like that.
I'm kind of curious, a question for you though. What other areas have your audiences, your guests said, definitely don't use it for this or for that? Because I feel like I'm open to anywhere.
Well, I think most of the guests that we've spoken to for this season, there's been quite a clear alignment on using it to help with ideation and help come up with ideas, and using it to help with reviewing content, but not using it to actually write the content for you. Basically what you were just saying. So sometimes like the really clear, no, stay clear is don't let it write social copy for you. Don't outsource your thought leadership to it. So thought leadership should be, differentiated and unique. So don't, ideation is all well and good, but guests have said if you're going to go to AI to help it develop thought leadership content, then it's not really thought leadership, is it? Because it's not unique or differentiated to you. It will be something that somebody has already said, because for the AI to have it, it had to have ingested it from somewhere. Therefore, it's not going to be unique. But I'd say like most people, it's more around just the no is don't let it write for you, really. Don't let it do the writing is probably the key.
I agree. Yeah. And that sameness, what I'm interested in is that sameness that it creates. So like you said, if everybody's using it, then I think that's where the opportunity comes in. There's a tendency, starting to get into future thinking here, but there's a tendency with any technology to be fascinated by it and then to immediately overuse it. And those cycles are going so much faster now, and it's been a year from here to AI really, or using AI in my work. And you can just see how overused it is. I cannot tell you how many things I'm reading where I'm seeing what we're talking about, where I'm like, okay, I just saw ensure 3 times in one paragraph. I know this is AI. And that makes me think, while I would think, oh, that's just so disappointing. Now I think, oh, there's such an opportunity here, in terms of what we do, that, yeah, it's very quickly getting to overused. And then the question becomes, and I think it's something hopefully we're going to talk about, is like, so what does that mean? What does that mean for what you and I do?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's where the interesting stuff is.
Well, exactly. And I had a really great conversation with Andy Crestadina on my other podcast, the Content 10X podcast, about his views on what this means. And we were talking about if you are creating content and it could compete with AI. So it's like a how-to piece of content, fairly straightforward, following some steps on how to do something. And AI creates content on that already that's provides you the steps and it's okay. What's the point in competing against AI for listicle AI type content? Because the AI has probably nailed that kind of content. So you have to create the different content that AI can't create. So we're changing, it would be quick to go to how-tos and listicles and things like that. But no, don't compete with AI, actually. What's differentiated, what's unique, what's different, because AI can't compete with you on that. So Andy talked about creating, from an SEO perspective, he called it visit website intent keywords. So, if you're going to compete against keywords, but then the snippets at the top of the search engines are going to be pretty spot on, that people will just read that. It's a quick answer, it's a quick list, it's a quick how-to. They're not going to go to a website. But this keyword in particular, the person searching that is going to want to go deep. So they're going to find an answer and go deep. So find the search terms and things like that a person is going to go deep on. And that's what you want to create the content for. Otherwise, just know what you're competing against, basically. I thought that was really fascinating. So he was talking from an SEO perspective, I suppose. They were changing world and what to look for and what to try and create from that perspective. Are there any other things that what your opinion on that, in terms of, what does it mean and what should we be creating?
Sure. I mean, I think those are great points. I think it's very, very smart to look at it that way. For me, what I think will be interesting is that outside the SEO use case, but when we write, what I think is going to become interesting, especially for B2B companies, because look, we talk about, us content marketers, I'm the first one to be guilty of this, but we talk about voice and tone all the time. And, we go out and we write, and oftentimes we're just so pressed for time or whatever it might be that the voice and tone gets lost. And one of those opportunities that I thought about was, when others are starting to rely too much, and I still think more and more people are going to rely on AI for these things. I forget where I was reading it. I was reading something that was like, it was a reputable brand, and I was reading it and I was like, I know that this paragraph is AI. It wasn't that the whole thing was AI, but I was like, this graph is AI. I know it is. And I just thought, it's really just come around. But the idea is that as others depend on it, I think voice is going to become so important. And I just think style, like how we say things. And I think back to some of the best B2B writers that I had ever met. Bob Evans, who was the editor-in-chief of Information Week long ago, back when Information Week was the thing, and is still, the consultant and has his own Cloud Wars brand. And I just think, like, regardless of all the great things that Bob has done, I just remember when I first met Bob 25 years ago, I just thought he was the best B2B writer I'd ever seen. And the reason was because his voice was in all of it. Like, I read everything that he wrote and I was like, that's just so Bob. The way he says it is so Bob, and I love that. I love that, not outside of B2B and, whomever it might be. I mean, my favorite sports writers or whatever it might be, they have a voice. And I think one of the things that I hope rises out of the ashes of whatever this dependence on AI written content creates is that you can get real attention for voice, and by your voice can become your brand, a part of your brand in a way, and that voice can draw people in to your B2B stuff. I'm not suggesting that that's easy because look, I'm writing about financial automation software, but I do believe that there's a way to write about these things in a way that is natural and captivating and very human and funny in the right spots that creates a voice that people are like, yeah, I love the way that this company expresses things. Or it's a simplicity in your voice, whatever it might be. I see that as being a big opportunity for folks like us. The other thing that I see happening is, over the course of the next few years, and it's interesting. I'd love to get your thoughts on this because I don't see this happening now, but I think there's going to be such a premium paid. I don't mean that literally, but there's going to be such a need for senior content strategy. And I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to just toot my own horn having done this because I'm probably more at the end of my career than the beginning of the career. But like the idea is that I think that there's one thing I do not see AI doing in the short term is it creates a lot of, you can ask it for strategy, but it's not going to be able to execute a real strategy for you. And it can come up with all sorts of great ideas. But what a company is going to need in 5 years is how it pulls all that together. Because I see right now, Amy, companies removing this strategic layer. I don't see many opportunities out there for senior level content people. And I see these opportunities for sort of mid and more junior level, which is great, but it's not making, something's not adding up in my mind because I kind of feel like, okay, my guess is you guys are all going to get addicted to volume because you're going to say, look at how much we can create. And I've been down this road, believe me. I've worked for a company where we wrote 1,000 blogs in a year. And so the idea is like, I think it's going to create this addiction to volume. And at some point, somebody in the higher levels of that company is going to be saying, well, what is our content strategy? And people around them are going to be like, well, we create this and we create this and we create this. And they're going to realize we don't have a content strategy. It's just random acts of content. What are we doing? And I think it comes back and they're like, we need strategic people to figure out how to organize this, how to make this work with this, how to repurpose content instead of just creating stuff with AI all the time, how to make sure that we're aligned with sales, how to make sure that we're aligned with product, whatever it might be. AI, they're going to realize AI isn't doing that for us. Stop. Let's go back. Let's bring in more senior people and see if they can help us rein this in. Because I've been around a while. I see how this stuff works. Like these things grow and you're like, wow, this is great. But before you know it, it's all off in different directions. And you're like, what are we going to do now? And somebody has to pull it back. And that's what I see happening with AI over the next 5 years in content.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on everything that you just said. I completely agree. And I think that is going to happen. And I'm hoping that some of the, people who are working in the companies that believe in the same thing as you and I are making sure that that doesn't happen where they are and that they're keeping that senior content strategy. You can't outsource the content strategy to the bots. And then if you go on a volume play, I mean, what's the one good thing? Well, many good things, but like AI is obviously brilliant at volume. Just ask it to write you 1,000 articles and it'll write you 1,000 articles, well, they won't be good. So I completely agree with you. And I think, I don't know, we'll go full circle because that realization will come when things don't work and nothing is aligned and the results aren't there and what are we even measuring, and it's also disjointed and probably disengagement from the people and like low job satisfaction if that's how people are going to work as well. So I think that implosion will come.
Yeah, I think like you and I can talk in whatever 3, 5 years. I have a feeling if we're honest with each other, we'll say something's not working. And you know, I think there will be a shift that we're talking about in terms of how companies are approaching content marketing. Because yeah, I mean, I do think right now, although Tipalti is not, we are not doing this. We are not volume driven, and I've been adamant about that since I got there. That I've made that mistake already. So please, let's not think volume. Let's not equate volume with success, and we don't. But I do see other companies doing that. I understand why they do it. I'm not trying to fault other people, but I do think that AI is creating this very knee-jerk reaction to like look at how much we can do. And I would just caution that how much you can do is not how well you can do.
No, no, absolutely. I just couldn't agree more. Our whole motto last year, like at the Content to Next, our motto was, less is more, and doing more with less. So you don't want to have 1,000 blog posts. Perhaps you just want to have 12 or 24, one or two a month, but then do more with that, because that was such a quality piece of content. There's so many individual and unique insights within it. It's got depth, it's got research, unique tone of voice. Make more from that than go on a volume play of just creating loads and loads of them. And that was the word that we kind of had pinned up in the office, so to speak, but do more with less. So I completely agree. There's so many more things that I want to cover with you, Paul. I have my big list, but I'm conscious we are running out of time. So I feel like really we should do a part 2 at some point, should we, to cover more of the things that I want to cover. So it's a tradition on this season 3 of our podcast that we ask our previous guest to ask a question to the next guest, and they don't know who you are. So, we position this as if you were in a room full of leaders in the B2B content marketing space and you wanted to ask a question, then what would that question be? So I'm conscious sometimes it hits right for the role that you're in, sometimes not quite, but I'm going to ask you your question. So it came from Kieran Regan, who is the CMO of Biz Design. And his question to you is,
how important do you see brand as a differentiator in even today's competitive market? If you agree that it is a crucial differentiator, how do you ensure that brand-focused campaigns are valued within your organization and also measured effectively?
Yeah, well, I mean, my expertise has never really been in brand marketing campaigns, but I mean, obviously I've worked around that area quite a bit. And, I absolutely believe brand is important. I do believe that, like, I'll give you an example with Tipalti. We have talked about this, that we're not, brand campaigns are important, but we have assessed that we're not quite ready for a brand campaign at this point. And I understand and agree with that 1,000%, that there's still a degree of who we are in terms of capabilities that we need to establish before we get into for me, I'll start with a definition. A brand campaign is about who we are as a company, what we stand for, and what our values are. And those things are super important. I do think in B2B software, and particularly B2B financial software, I think we have to lay the groundwork for brand. And so right now, we aren't out there with, for example, brand campaigns, although we were just talking about it yesterday, that we know that that's coming for us. So I definitely see the value of the brand campaign, and I see it particularly, I think, because of changes in our audience, that I think the value of the brand campaign is something that, like, for example, we could be talking for part 2 whenever we do part 2 of this, right? And we could, if it's, let's say it's in a few years, we could talk about how I've changed my mind on that I do believe that a brand campaign early on might be smart for us. And, what changed your mind, Paul? Well, I think the audience that we're dealing with, these new generations, I just from everything I've tried to understand about them, and I'm obviously no expert, but I don't think they want to be bombarded with these kinds of product messages. I mean, I think that they instinctively want to know that they connect with the essence of a brand. And yes, I know that's much more true of sneakers and fashion and all the other consumer things that they buy. But I think we would be remiss not to realize that that's also going to trickle down into other areas of what they buy. And if that's something that they buy for the job that they do, I still think that's a part of what goes into their decision making. And so I think I start to believe that brand campaigns are going to play more of a role in trying to set that foundation. Because, I just described we have to talk about our product stuff to set the foundation for a brand campaign. I can see a day where that flips, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely makes sense. Yeah. I love that answer. It was good. And yeah, makes sense.
I'm going to be more involved in these brand campaigns. Like I said, I haven't traditionally done them. It's been another role, but at Tipalti, we'll be more involved in those brand campaigns. So I'm sort of excited to learn more about that. It was a great question, and I'm excited. Hopefully I'll know more about that if we ever talk about it again.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to hear your view and perspective anyway, as somebody who's not closely involved necessarily in brand campaigns. It's just really good to therefore hear your view from that perspective too. So, really, really good answer. So thank you. So finally, we turn the microphone on you for asking the question to the next guest. So as I said, a leader in B2B marketing, if you were to just kind of address your peers and ask them a question that would be useful for you to know, what would your question be?
Yeah, so it kind of relates to what we were just talking about with AI and the future and all that kind of stuff. Because I was thinking about this, I was having a conversation with someone who's not in content marketing last week, and this came up, and I thought, I didn't really know that I had a good answer for it, which was, if someone came up to you today with all of your experience, if somebody came up to you today and said, I want to get into content marketing, what advice would you give them about how to succeed in it, knowing what you know right now? And I wasn't particularly sure what I would say because of all the things that we just talked about that I think will shift. I do think content marketing is going to look, it's one thing in particular that's going to look, to me, significantly different. And I'm kind of curious what advice your next guest would give to someone who's just starting out in this business. Hopefully no one's asked that question, but I'm kind of curious, and I would like to have it, if they can, couch it in terms of what they think the shifting landscape is going to look like, and therefore their advice would be X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that, more kind of like a career-based question. And it's a tough one to answer. All industries change. Well, many industries change at a fast rate, don't they? And at the moment, a lot of them are coping with AI in different ways, as well as all the other things that are going on. So yeah, being able to carve out what would be the steps at the start of a career, that's just going to kind of evolve and change, isn't it? And without to overuse an AI term.
Would you tell them not to, don't worry so much about the writing part, you tell them, because maybe they don't need to be as great a writer as, for us, I felt like I needed to establish myself as a writer first and foremost in content marketing. Would I need to do that if I were getting into it today? I don't know. I'm guessing, but I'm kind of curious.
I'm curious to hear what the next guest has to say too, because I still feel that one of the most important skills is still the writing. I don't think that has really changed, to be honest. But yeah, being more multi format experience too. So being familiar with modern marketing. We're talking about B2B marketing. We probably want to talk about learning about webinars and podcasts and videos and social and all those things too. But what's the best steps, the first step? So yeah, I look forward to that. We'll hear what the next guest has to say. Well, thank you, Paul. Absolutely fantastic to have this conversation with you. I'm sure that everybody either listening or watching has got tremendous value from it. So, really do appreciate your time to come on and have this conversation. So Thanks a lot. And where would you like anyone to go to let you know if they've listened to this and enjoyed it and would like to connect with you? I'm sure you're going to say LinkedIn. I ask that question to everyone and the answer is usually LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best place rather than give out my personal email address or my phone number. I think LinkedIn would be the best way. And I just want to say thanks for inviting me to this. I had a great time. I'm kind of like, come on, I got another at least 40 minutes left to go. So let's do that in version 2, hopefully, because I'd love to come back and talk about some of those other topics.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. Well, yeah, we will do that. And thank you. I'll put the link to Paul's LinkedIn. So if you're listening now or watching, you can go connect. But otherwise, yeah, we look forward to part 2. We must do that. And in the meantime, yeah, thank you once again. It's been great.
Thanks, Amy.